Hi everyone, it's me, Sandy Cruz of Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. For years now, I've been bringing to you conversations about wellness from experts from all over the world. Whether it be suggestions in how you can age better, biohacking, alternative wellness, these are conversations to help you live your best life. I want to live a long, healthy, and vibrant life. Never mind all those stigmas that as we reach midlife and beyond, we're just going to shrivel up and die with some horrible disease. Always remember, balanced living works. I really look forward to this season. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today, as part of my summer reboot series, I am bringing back to you, for you, my incredible interview with Dr. Dale Bredesen. He is the physician and he is the author and creator of the book, The End of Alzheimer's. He also has a newer book out where he illustrates very clearly his program and the patients that he has helped and he has followed over the years who have been doing his program. And even newer still, which actually was released after I released this podcast, is a documentary based on Dr. Dale Bredesen's work on Alzheimer's. It's called Memories for Life Film. So I would love for you to listen and share this podcast with anybody who is aging, with anyone who has aging parents. If you want to learn yourself, if you might carry some of the genes that Dr. Dale Bredesen does talk about in this podcast, remember, for the most part, we need to turn on those genes. And there are a lot of things, I will say, in our environment that we may not have complete control over. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of upheaval right now as it relates to food and pharmaceuticals and natural health products. I can feel the tension. And that's why my preamble today is a little bit more. I want you to listen to this whole podcast for sure. But I want you to understand that we must, as humans, be able to decipher resonance on what is being told to us and fed to us. I think it's very important because my job and what I do as an educator is to simply provide you those breadcrumbs. I give you the breadcrumbs and it's up to you to follow them. So this podcast does not give individual medical advice. It is simply here for educational purposes only. And it's for you to go and take this information, research it, read Dr. Dale Bredesen's book, watch the documentary on his actual, the way that patients have been followed, and understand one thing. This is probably the most important thing to understand. If it is a take one pill approach, it's not going to work. Not probably, it's not going to work. What people need to understand is that nowadays we may need to work a little bit harder for our health and our longevity. And it's not just about our longevity, because we are living longer, but we're living sicker. We have more disease. We have more autoimmune conditions. severe allergies, gut dysfunction, Alzheimer's, dementia. My mother-in-law passed away. It's now 6 years since she passed. She had dementia. And it's a very, very difficult thing to watch. Really, really difficult. So for those of you listening who have a parent or who know somebody who is showing signs of cognitive decline, understand that there's more than one way. There's always more than one way to do things. And while it may not be a simple, easy road, Dr. Dale Bredesen has done the work to show that it works. It's a road that you can take to help with dementia, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, and even reverse it. This is his work. So I want you to listen to this. I would love for you to rate, review my podcast. The best way to do this is to go to Apple, search Sandy K Nutrition, scroll down a little bit, you'll see rate, so give it 5 stars, and then a little bit more that you scroll down, write a review and write a few kind words, because this is what helps me to get incredible guests like Dr. Dale Bredesen to keep bringing topics to you, for you, to truly help you to age better from a non-agenda perspective. I don't have an agenda except to provide you with information so that you can just age better with me. So I'm not aging better all alone, people. So please do that for me. You can find me on all the social media channels. It's Sandy K Nutrition everywhere. I'm probably most active on Instagram. I have a Facebook group. I have a private Facebook page. I am on TikTok. I am kind of everywhere. My podcast is everywhere. So I'd ask that you share this, because it is a really, really important topic. I also just released the Essential Thyroid Guide this year. And as far as I know, I could be wrong here, guys, but I believe it's the first really simplified patient advocacy guide, not clinical, just to help you understand the function of your thyroid and what you can do to optimize it. Trust me, I work on it constantly, even though I don't have a thyroid. But because I don't have a thyroid and I'm a 54-year-old woman going through menopause without the master gland, I'm figuring stuff out. And I know a lot of people, because so many of you come to me to talk thyroid about how horrible you feel. There are ways that we can optimize our vibrancy and live an enriched life and age well, even without the master gland. So now, go follow me on all the channels, review this podcast, share it with someone, and now I'm going to cut on through to this amazing interview with Dr. Dale Bredesen. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have a special guest, Dr. Dale Bredesen. He is a scientist, a researcher, and an expert in neurodegenerative diseases, particularly Alzheimer's disease. He published over 200 papers, which many of them you can find in a PubMed search. In 2017, he wrote a groundbreaking book, a New York Times bestseller called The End of Alzheimer's, and then several years later wrote a follow-up book, The End of Alzheimer's Program. And last year, he wrote The First Survivors of Alzheimer's, How Patients Recovered Life and Hope in Their Own Words. Dr. Bredesen is a professor at UCLA, but he's also taught at UC San Francisco and the University of California, San Diego. He directed the program on aging at the Burnham Institute before going to the Buck Institute for research on aging in 1998 and its founding president and CEO. And today we are going to talk all about Alzheimer's. I think this is so topical. Everybody's talking about brain health and Alzheimer's and dementia. So I am really excited for this conversation. And with that, welcome, Dr. Bredesen.
Thanks so much, Sandy. Thanks for having me on.
I am so happy to chat with you. And, it's kind of funny because I get almost starstruck when I read somebody's book and then I get to meet them on Zoom because you're doing such incredible work. And I want to know what inspires you, what inspired you to get into this field of medicine?
Yeah, thank you. So when I was a freshman in college, I got interested in the brain. So I've been studying it ever since. And one of the things that has been concerning to me when I was trained as a neurologist and then neuroscientist is that this is the area where we have the least success. As physicians, we've done the worst when it comes to neurodegeneration, whether it's Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body disease, ALS, you just go right down the list. These are all death sentences. Why? Why such problems? So I started a lab 30 years ago, and I studied under two different Nobel laureates, started my own lab way back in 1989. And the whole idea was, could we understand the fundamental nature of the neurodegenerative process? So the idea is, if we can't do anything about these diseases, why not? What's wrong? And so it took us a long time. We were a bit slow. But we finally got to the point where we said, okay, now we kind of get this. This is different than what people have been thinking for what the problem actually is. And so that gave us a chance back in 2012. I saw the first patient after all these years with mice and fruit flies and all this sort of stuff and killing cells in the laboratory. Finally, in 2012, the first patient came in and said, hey, I have a real problem here. My mother died of Alzheimer's. I'm having problems. And so we said, look, well, here's how the disease actually works. We had tried to do a clinical trial. They would not allow us to do the clinical trial because we said, look, this is a multivariable disease. You have to look at all these different factors. And, that this is functional medicine these days. Yeah. You can't just look at one thing. The body is not that simple. And so we had tremendous success. And if you take a look at the book, the First Survivors of Alzheimer, 7 of the people who did very well wrote about their own journeys and what it was like to be told by their doctors, you're going to die, there's nothing you can do, and then to get better. So if you can go through that whole book without a tear, then you're a better person than I am.
Wow. It's very inspiring to know that there is some hope, because when we do go to I know I had a mother-in-law with dementia, and there was nothing that they could tell us. They just said, you know what, it's just going to be a decline. And in her case, it ended up being a very quick decline because she also happened to have a brain tumor. So, but in the end, really, my husband and I, we talk about that and we think, well, that was almost like, a blessing that she didn't live as long as some people do live with Alzheimer's.
This is such an important point, and one that is ignored typically by the different drugs trials. As one spouse told me, he said, my wife has Alzheimer's and the drug companies are telling me that they can slow it down a little, but they can't make her better. He said, I can tell you as someone living with someone with Alzheimer's, that's the last thing you would want. That's just prolonging the torture. So this is, really unfortunate. And so, of course, we all want the same thing, which is for people to actually get better with their cognition and then to stay better. We've had people now who are coming up on 11 years on our protocol who have continued to do very, very well. Some of them wrote about it in the book. It's really remarkable to see that.
Dr. Bredesen, I think it's important to really outline the differences between, there's cognitive decline, then there is dementia, and then there's Alzheimer's. So what's the difference between the three?
Yeah, that's a good point. So cognitive decline, it means that you're having difficulty with your thinking. And it often starts about 2/3 of the time, it starts with memory, and that's the dominant one. But the other 1/3 of the time, it's what we call non-amnestic, or anamnestic. So it's where you're not having the major problem as memory, but you're typically having major problem as problems navigating in space, or problems planning. This is a common one where you say, oh yeah, the person will have trouble at their job because they can't plan things, so-called executive dysfunction, or they have problem recognizing faces, or they have problem with word finding. So all these things are the non-amnestic presentations. So that's cognitive decline, and this leads ultimately to dementia, which is that's the end stage. And this is one of the big problems, by the way. People wait too long. They don't get on active prevention or earliest treatment. If everybody would get in at those first two stages instead of at the third and fourth stage, and the third stage is mild cognitive impairment and the fourth stage is dementia, then literally we could make this disease optional. And that's been really the big take home. Alzheimer's is now optional. You don't have to get it if you simply get on active prevention or earliest treatment. Now, Alzheimer's is the most common cause of the cognitive decline that ultimately becomes dementia. So the most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's, but there are other ones. Lewy body dementia, there are about 1 million Americans who have that. Frontotemporal dementia is another one, not as common, but another one that we talk about. There are others, things like progressive supranuclear palsy, which affects your gaze, up and down gaze first, but ultimately can give people dementia as well. Corticobasal degeneration, that's another common. So all these things are causes, but Alzheimer's is the big one that causes the majority. So that's the difference. Alzheimer's is a specific type of dementia. And by the way, vascular dementia is another one. Whereas dementia is just a generic term that means you're not thinking well. And by the time you have true dementia, you have trouble taking care of yourself. You have trouble with your activities of daily living. So again, we want to get it early. One of the big problems is people talk about mild cognitive impairment, MCI.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, yeah, you only have MCI, don't worry. This is like telling someone, don't worry, you only have mildly metastatic cancer. It's a late stage of the problem that ultimately becomes dementia. So we'd like to get it in the earliest stages.
Okay. I'm glad that you clarified that because, the way that it was described to us is like dementia comes before Alzheimer's. Isn't that interesting? So, even those definitions are important to understand because we don't always get the true definition when we go to the doctor and we say, or in our case, we went to the doctor and it was told that she has dementia, but it never really figured out. We were like, oh, okay, well, maybe this isn't quite Alzheimer's yet.
Yeah, no, that's not the way it works. So Alzheimer's is the underlying process. So you can have dementia, which is due to Alzheimer's, or you can have MCI, which is due to Alzheimer's, or you can have SCI, which is subjective cognitive impairment. That's the earliest stage. Or you can be pre-symptomatic and still have the underlying changes of Alzheimer's. So one of the big problems, it's been determined that by the time you get the diagnosis, you typically have about 20-year run. The good news there is you can get it early and do something that's much, much easier. Now, we've seen people even late stages improve, but it's harder to make them improve the longer you wait, and it's harder to get them all the way back. We don't see people with a MoCA score of 0. MoCA is Montreal Cognitive Assessment. This goes from 0 to 30. So we'd like people to come in when they're in the 20s, not when they're down at 0. We do see people with 0 get better, but we don't see them come all the way back to normal. And that's one of the things we're working on. Mm-hmm. How do we get someone who's in the latest stages to come all the way back to normal?
Okay, so you mentioned the MoCA score. This is
Yes.
very important. I remember sitting down with my husband and my mother-in-law, and I remember the clock, the drawing of the clock,
Yep.
and
Yep.
how does somebody? What are your recommendations for doing this? Like, should everybody, maybe midlife, just do a little test, and can we do that, or does it have to be done with our physicians?
No, that's a really good point. In fact, you can just go on a website. You can go on My Cognoscopy. So what we recommend is we all know when we turn 50, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to get a colonoscopy.
Yeah.
And so our point was, well, look, if you turn 45 or if you're already past 45, please get a cognoscopy. And I have to say, it's much more pleasant than a colonoscopy.
Yep.
Much easier. And that just means three things. Number one, it's some basic blood tests. And you can literally go on mycognoscopy.com and you can get some simple blood tests. You can get a simple online cognitive assessment, which gives you what's called a CQ score. Just like knowing your IQ, you want to know your CQ, your cognitive quotient. And it gives you some simple tests. It takes about 20 minutes or so. And so you can see where you stand. And part of the problem is, again, people have waited until they're having major problems. We want to when things start to change for you, we want to know that because there's a tremendous amount that can be reversed. We see it all the time. We had for example, a woman several years ago who said, well, I think I'm here for prevention, but there's a lot of Alzheimer's in my family. And she actually had the common Alzheimer's associated gene, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
And she scored 23 out of 30 on her MoCA, which is already significant MCI. So she was already in that third stage. And she got on the program. She's scoring perfect 30. She's done very, very well. And so it sneaks up on you. You think, well, I'm not that affected, but you're already starting to have problems because you don't notice those micro changes day to day. But over time, they really catch up with you. So it's a very good idea, as you mentioned. Get your cognoscopy. And I should mention the third part of the cognoscopy is an MRI, but you only need that if you have symptoms or if you're scoring poorly. If you have no symptoms, if you're doing well, just check it out. You see what your score is, see how you're doing, and then do it again in a year. And if you start falling off, let us know that we can do a lot about it to get you back to normal. You do it that way. Literally, Alzheimer's is optional.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about the many different causes of Alzheimer's, because I know I've read your book twice now.
Yeah.
And it's not a silver bullet approach. Like there could be many causes and they can cross over. So maybe let's get into the causes so that people who are listening, you can get Dr. Bredesen's book to understand it more in depth and see where you're at.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, we wanted to understand what drives this problem and why is it so common? What is the fundamental nature of what we call Alzheimer's disease? And then does that tell us what to do about it? And so there are all these ideas, as you know. It's about misfolded proteins and aggregated proteins and reactive oxygen species, and it's about herpes, and it's about type 3 diabetes and prions and tau and amyloid. Just go down the list. There's a long list. None of those ideas has ever led to a treatment that really works, that makes people get better and stay better. That's the yardstick that you have to use.
Yeah.
Can you make people better? Can you keep them better? And so what we found, as you alluded to, is that there are many contributors. And now how does that work? Okay, so what happens is that and this is again why people have been confused. There are two separate things you have to think about: the process itself and how you get the symptoms. So the process itself turns out to be, very interestingly, a chronic encephalitis. So encephalitis just means a inflammation in your brain. And so, okay, you can get an encephalitis from things like herpes. You can get a very active encephalitis, acute encephalitis. You can get a chronic encephalitis from things like tuberculosis or syphilis or things like that. And so It can be things like a granulomatous, which just is describing the pathology. So what Alzheimer's is a chronic encephalitis. It's inflammation that goes on for many years, but it's chronic, what we would call plaquomatous, because you make these little amyloid plaques in your brain. So it's a type of chronic inflammation of your brain. So it's your immune system responding to insults. That's what's driving the process. But your symptoms are coming about because you're losing synapses. So you have about 500 trillion synapses in your brain. And so that's from about 100 billion brain cells, neurons specifically, that are communicating with each other. So go ahead.
Can you just elaborate for people listening? What is a synapse?
Yeah, great point. So the way your brain works, very much like a computer, you have interactions where you are communicating essentially one element to another. And so every place there is a connection, and it's interesting. The connections are very close, but they don't quite touch. So they get very, very close. And then that little distance between the two is the synapse. And the way they then communicate, you've got the electricity coming down the neuron, but then it spews out some chemicals so what happens is really interesting. Your brain basically has all these synapses, these connections. And so what it does is it takes little inputs, all sorts of different inputs. So this would be an analog to digital converter. So in other words, you get all these inputs, all these things happening, smelling, tasting, seeing, hearing, thinking, all this sort of stuff. But at the end of each of these connections, you decide either you're going to send the chemical or you're not. So you're changing these little signals, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, to a big one saying, I'm going to communicate or I'm not. So you're going to remember or you're not going to remember.
Very cool.
And so those are the synapses. And what happens in Alzheimer's is you lose these. First, they still are there, but they're not talking to each other very well. They don't communicate as well. But ultimately, they die back and they disappear. So ultimately, you have many fewer synapses. So what happens is you've got this inflammatory process that is reducing your synapse number. They're going down, 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 down. And as these goes down, you don't think as well. The good news is before you actually lose them, they're as I mentioned, they're functionally not well. So you can resurrect them. You can get them to be functionally well again. You can turn off the inflammation. You can even build them back up to a certain extent. And we're doing better and better with being able to do that. So you got to think about both of those things, getting rid of that inflammation and finding out why you have it, and then building up those synapses again, making them function again so that you're now thinking you've got your neuroplasticity back. Now, what causes that inflammation? That's the tricky part. There are dozens of things. So, for example, if you have poor dentition, you may find what's called P. gingivalis, which is one of the bacteria in your oral microbiome. They actually get into your brain. And so your brain responds by getting inflamed, and it's trying to kill them. And guess what it makes, which is really good to kill bacteria? Amyloid. So the very stuff that has been vilified, and the drug companies keep trying to give you monoclonal antibodies to remove your amyloid. Well, guess what? It's there because you've had various insults, and it's trying to deal with them. So it's literally trying to protect your brain. But so you can think about this a little bit like if you're in a house and the house now catches fire because, an intruder's come in and you're trying to get rid of that intruder. You got to get rid of the intruder and put out the fire for your house to do well. And the symptoms are like you're actually losing room after room in your house. So you got to build back the house as well. But first, get rid of the intruder, then put out the fire, then build back the house. That's the same thing that's going on. And by the way, this is one of the reasons that COVID-19 is so relevant for Alzheimer's disease. It is yet another way where you have an insult, it affects your brain responds by trying to get rid of that, but in so doing, there's inflammation going on and you begin that downsizing process again. So no surprise, Number one, when you get COVID, you can get brain fog. It's very common, and it is related to what at the years later could become Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I've heard
In fact,
this.
it's already been shown that if you've had COVID, and virtually all of us have had COVID,
Yep.
And so you are at increased risk because of that inflammation. So again, get on the right things, get yourself evaluated, optimize your metabolism, reduce your inflammation, and you will reduce your likelihood of developing cognitive decline in the future. And again, make it truly an optional process.
Wow. I mean, you describe it all so well because it's never described to us like this.
Right. Yeah.
Never.
I know there's always this idea that, some protein folded wrong and you got to get rid of that thing. It's just so silly because it doesn't help you get better. So that's the critical thing. It's got, whatever the model is, whatever your understanding of this process is, has to be borne out by clinical trials. And we published a clinical trial. It's freely available online. You can see it. Came out last June in Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. And in 84% of the people actually got better. Didn't just slow their decline. They actually got better.
That's massive.
It wasn't 100%. We're still working. We have a new trial that's just starting, and I'm really excited to be working with 6 absolutely fantastic functional medicine physicians. And it's going to be at 6 sites. It'll be in Miami. It'll be in Nashville, Cleveland, Sacramento, San Francisco, and Oakland. So if you're in any of those areas, you have to be within 1 hour of the office. Please consider getting on this trial that's just starting.
That's brilliant. Okay. So this trial, what are the, do you have to be already a certain score on the MoCA?
Great.
How? Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have some symptoms. So, so it's not a prevention trial. It is very similar to the drug trials. And we found much better results than any of the drug trials. But you can't be too far along. So basically you have to have MCI or early stage dementia with a MoCA score of 18 or higher.
Okay. That's good to know. That is really good to know. Now, we mentioned the inflammation. Now,
yes,
there are many other drivers, and I know everyone talks because so many people have done the 23andMe genetic testing, and there's this nasty ApoE4 gene. And I did read in your book that does put you at additional risk, and you can have 1 copy or 2 copies, correct? Do you want to expand on that?
It's a great point. And there are over 50 genes that increase risk for Alzheimer's, all working together. But the most common one, and the one that's kind of dominated the literature, is, as you said, ApoE4. So ApoE, apolipoprotein E. This is a protein that carries around fats. And so it's a little bit like your butcher. It's the guy who carries the fats around. And what we found is really interesting, that this thing also enters your cell, goes into the nucleus, and changes the programming toward a more pro-inflammatory state. So interestingly, it's not just your butcher, it's also your senator, because it's literally making the laws of the land. Now, 3/4 of people have no copies of it. So for example, I checked myself, I'm an ApoE3/3, which is the most common one. That's like being vanilla. 1/4 of people have a single copy. If you have no copies, your chance of getting Alzheimer's during your lifetime is about 9%. It's not 0. You can certainly get it.
That's me.
Okay.
I don't have any copies.
Well, that's a good thing. But again, it's not 0. So you still want to take good care of yourself.
Yes.
Get yourself to be metabolically optimal. Keep your inflammation down. Make sure you have good dentition. You don't have a leaky gut. All of these potential contributors, as you indicated. Now, you have a single copy, and that's about 75 million Americans, as I mentioned, about 1/4 of the population. Then your chance is about 30% during your lifetime. It's not 100%, but it's clearly higher. If you have 2 copies, and that's 2 million Americans, and unfortunately the vast majority of people don't know their ApoE status, so we should really all know our ApoE status because we should get on active prevention. 2 copies, 2 million Americans, your chance is about 70%. Most likely you will develop Alzheimer's. So look, let's get ahead of the game. Let's make sure you never get it. There's a wonderful website started by a woman who had 2 copies of ApoE4, Julie G., and it's called apoe4.info. I recommend everyone check it out. Very helpful. And the vast majority of those people are on the protocol that we designed, or on some variation of the protocol that we designed all those years ago, back in 2012, and doing very, very well. So, again, we recommend, whereas we've been told in the past that everything's been backwards because there wasn't anything you could do, they say, don't bother finding out your genetic profile because there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing could be further from the truth. They say, there's nothing that can be done to prevent or reverse or delay. That's ridiculous. Now that we understand this much better, we see person after person after person getting better. So that's the idea here, and tremendous amount you can do about it. This is a gene, and one of the questions was, why is it so? Why is this so related to Alzheimer's? Why would something that carries fat around your body, why would that be so relevant for Alzheimer's? And the answer is because it is reprogramming your cells to be more pro-inflammatory. Now, that's fantastic when you need that inflammation. So as Professor Tuck Finch from USC has pointed out, that when we came down, when the simians became the hominids, which was 5 to 7 million years ago, what happened? We came down out of the trees. We were walking along the savannah in Africa. We were puncturing our feet. You can die from these microbes. And having ApoE4, which was the primordial gene, that actually helped us to survive. And also it helped us to survive eating raw meat, which is full of microbes often. So it helped us to survive. But in so doing, because you're getting inflammation, then in the long run, it does give us more brain inflammation, more Alzheimer's, more vascular inflammation, and therefore more cardiovascular disease, and a slightly shorter lifespan. If you're living in a third world country, it's an advantage. If you're living in a first world country, it's a disadvantage. So, okay, you can do something about this. Simply know it ahead of time. Get on more anti-inflammatory approaches. You can do this with diet, with supplement. There's all sorts of things you can do to reduce that inflammation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, most important of all, find out where the inflammation's coming from. If it's from a leaky gut, which is very common, heal your gut. If it's from a poor oral microbiome, use some dental sidin, improve your oral microbiome. You can easily check this now with a so-called oral DNA. Also, something called MyPeriopath. These are excellent to check your oral microbiome. We now understand where this problem is coming from. So it's silly, this old idea that, well, we have no idea what's causing this and there's nothing we can do about it. That is really outdated thinking.
So what do you recommend as, let's say I'm not in the wellness industry. I don't know anything much about this. Do I go and get a 23andMe test? Is there a better way to test? And then where do I go from there? Because people like to have almost instruction on how to do this. Because if you're not, I know how to deal and assess my inflammation, but I'm a practitioner. But a lot of people don't have that knowledge. So what do you suggest?
And this is part of the functional medicine revolution. There was a wonderful Amazon review of the most recent book by a guy who said, look, I go in, my doctor has no idea how to keep me well. And he just always wants to write me a prescription. He wants to rush from room to room. It's a horrible state of affairs right now, unfortunately. And part of that is nothing to offer Alzheimer's patients. So here's the thing. You can go, there are a couple things you can do. Start with getting a cognoscopy. Go on mycognoscopy.com, get a cognoscopy, see where you stand. If you're not having any problems, if you're asymptomatic, you don't even really need to work with a doctor. You can work with a health coach who can just help you. Okay, get the right things. And then if you need to bring in the doctor, fine. If you're having symptoms already, then absolutely you should have a doctor. We've trained over 2,000 doctors now in 10 different countries and all over the US. So this is available wherever you're going to be. And in fact, the My Cognoscopy site will show you where the doctors are
Oh,
available
good.
as well. So you can easily find someone who knows what they're doing, who will help you to address these things. But as you alluded to, yes, it's important to know, do you have ongoing inflammation? And you can see that simply, for example, with HSCRP, one simple blood test to see where you stand with inflammation. You can look at other things like your albumin to globulin ratio. So there are critical tests. And unfortunately, many standard of care doctors are not doing the most important tests. You want to know what your homocysteine is, because that is another look not only at inflammation, but at your vascular status and your methylation and detox status. You want to know if you're having issues with detoxification. You want to know if you've already had some damage to your gut and if it's actually leaking into your bloodstream. You want to know if your hormones are not what they should be, because again, you want to support your synapses, and part of that is to support your mitochondria. So there's an energetic component here, as well as the inflammatory, the immune component to this problem.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the ApoE4 gene as a risk. What about other risks? Like, for example, what if you've had multiple concussions? Or, there's other factors that could come into play. What are those, Dr. Bredesen?
Yeah, great point. So one of the things that we found as we started to look at these expanded lab values to say, okay, what's going on here that actually drives the process? What we identified is that there are 6 different types of Alzheimer's. So not everyone gets it the same way. So we've already talked about type 1, which is inflammatory. Type 2 is atrophic. You don't have any estradiol, progesterone, testosterone. They are very low. And so you're not able to support that network. It takes support to keep that network. And that really means 3 different things: hormones, nutrients, and growth factors, things like nerve growth factor and brain-derived neurotrophic factor and things like that. So that's type 2 atrophic. Then there's type 1.5 because it's got some of both of those. And that's really glycotoxic, literally sugar giving you Alzheimer's. And I have to say there's a wonderful paper that just came out from Professor Rick Johnson at University of Colorado. And it's all about the fact that one of the likely drivers is fructose, which doesn't mean you should stop eating fruit. Fruit has the advantage that you have some fiber in there, but you don't want to overdo it. And the big problem, of course, is we've all been massively exposed to high fructose corn syrup for years and years and years. And guess what? Guess what happened to dementia? Guess what happened to obesity? Guess what happened to metabolic syndrome? They all did the same thing. And fructose is fascinating. And as he has shown with his research, what it's telling the organism is that winter is coming, because fructose used to come only from fruit, of course. So it says winter is coming. You're going to turn down the energy. You're going to store fat. So all the things that you don't want to be doing. And it also, unfortunately, creates some inflammation. So it's a recipe for cognitive decline, too much fructose. So you want to give yourself Alzheimer's, and I've got a chapter in the book about how to give yourself Alzheimer's if you want to do it. Yeah, the first thing you do is go out and eat a bunch of high fructose corn syrup. And then you can add things like sleep apnea, which adds, unfortunately. So that's 1, 1.5, and 2. Type 3 is toxic, and the toxins unfortunately contribute as well. And there are 3 different groups of them. So it can be because of the inorganic. So air pollution, and there's a lot of elegant work now on air pollution, and it's increasing risk for Alzheimer's disease. The second group is the organics, things like glyphosate and toluene and benzene and formaldehyde and things like that we can be exposed to. And then the third group is biotoxins. Unfortunately, there are certain molds, for example, that will make toxins, and we don't recognize this. We're living in houses, as they say, built with mold food. If you've got water intrusion in your house or your place of work, you are likely exposed to some of these mycotoxins. And unfortunately, they can bring about cognitive decline. In part, they do induce this inflammatory response. And then type 4 is vascular. So if you don't have enough vascular support, either because you've got Again, it comes back to energetics, poor blood flow, poor oxygenation, which is again why sleep apnea is such a huge issue, poor mitochondrial function. And guess what turns down your mitochondria? The amyloid turns down your mitochondria, but so does the fructose turn down that mitochondria, and so do all sorts of things that you can be exposed to eating, things like that. And then ketones. So in fact, ketones are important because you should be able to go back and forth. Our brains require either glucose to burn or ketones to burn. And so the problem is, as we get past 40, for many of us, we lose both of these. We lose the ability to burn the glucose very well because we have insulin resistance. We've got these high insulins all the time, and so they're turning down the ability to utilize the glucose. On the other hand, because of that chronically high insulin, that prevents you from going into ketosis. So your brain is literally starving. It can't burn the glucose. It can't burn the ketones. It can't make the ketones. So when we treat people, we have to restore both of those. So we actually start by just giving you some ketones. Okay, at least you're literally starving. Let's get that going. And then we want to make you insulin sensitive once again so that you can now go back and forth. This is metabolic flexibility, which is so critical and is a really great anti-Alzheimer's strategy. And then the final type 5 is just what you mentioned, head trauma. So if you've had head trauma, you are at increased risk for cognitive decline.
Okay. I mean, you've heard all of the major reasons. These are the root causes. But then, first off, I just want to say it's so interesting because when you mentioned the ketones, yes. I used to eat very specifically a keto diet. And yes. Then I found that it was too extreme for me. However, I still am a believer of low, simple carbohydrate diet. So,
different.
Yeah.
Yes. So here's the critical difference, and people mix this up all the time. So yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about a ketogenic diet. We're talking about a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet with appropriate fasting, high fiber, high phytonutrients. That's what makes the brain work the best and degenerate the least. When you're talking about a ketogenic diet, you're talking about hamburgers and bacon and ham, all this stuff. That's actually not so good for you.
They call it dirty keto, Dr. Bredesen. I've heard that term. I'm like, oh my gosh, no dirty keto, please.
Yeah, plant-rich, mildly ketogenic. And everyone should check their ketones once in a while. See where you stand. Because the best is, and if you've got symptoms, you want to be up there at 1.0, 2.0, in that range somewhere. If you're asymptomatic, yes, you can be a little bit lower than that. But again, you want to be able to go back and forth. And you want to have good insulin sensitivity, and you want to have a ketone level that comes up that gives you that extra energy. And in fact, Professor Stephen Kinane from Canada has shown beautiful studies just treating MCI patients with ketones alone, just giving them exogenous ketones, improve them. Now, the problem is, of course, they still have the ongoing inflammation. So in the long run, it's not great, but it starts by giving you better cognition. So energetics, really, really important. And a plant-rich, we call it Keto Flex 12-3. And by the way, it'll actually very soon be available so you can literally get meals delivered to your house that give you Keto Flex 12-3, that help to get you toward optimal cognition and get you the right kind of plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. We're working with a group called Nutrition for Longevity, which is an excellent group. So that'll be available soon. Please, as you kind of indicated, there are getting on optimal nutrition, optimal diets, optimal metabolism is a critical part of the overall strategy.
Yeah. And I think one thing I do want to address, because I've heard this actual statement from a number of people, that knowing scares them. So yes. What do you say to patients who, and I've actually heard this recently, I don't want to know my genetics. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And I'm always of the mindset that knowledge is power, yes. Right? Because I think that the mindset that I don't want to know comes from you can't do anything about it.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you say to yourself, okay, do I want to go to this upcoming meeting? Okay, if someone could tell you, I can tell you there's either going to be zero COVID there, or it's going to be so intensely filled with COVID, you're 100% going to get COVID. Would you then want to know that? Of course you would.
Yeah.
You'd want to know, because if it was the one with full of COVID, you wouldn't go.
Right.
And if it's
Right.
the one where there's absolutely zero, you wouldn't worry. So the whole issue is, can you do something about it? And you're absolutely right. We've been told over the years, don't know because there's nothing you can do about it. We now know there's a tremendous amount you can do about it. So it's absolutely very helpful to know. I know it's a change in thinking, so you kind of have to take a deep breath. But if you find out, then you can get on active prevention, and then you'll know your future. Your future is going to be without Alzheimer's, instead of just rolling the dice and say, yeah, my future might have Alzheimer's, and there may be very little I can do about it. So again, I urge people, please get on active prevention. And if you don't do that, at least if the first symptom of any sign, any problems, please get on active treatment, because this is a new era. There is so much that can be done. And please take a look. Some of the stories from the survivors, the first survivors of Alzheimer's, they talked about this very issue and what it felt like to be told, hey, there's nothing you can do about this. And then to start, seeing themselves get better. One of the people had watched her grandmother die of Alzheimer's, had watched her father die of Alzheimer's, and then had seen that she was getting the same symptoms, went to a major university, and they said, yeah, you're in the early stages. And she looked at her children and thought, oh my gosh, they're going to go through this as well. When she got better, and she's done very well, then realized, hey, my children are going to be fine. Let's put an end to it at the current generation. And that's just what we're doing. So part of that is find out your risk and get on active prevention or treatment.
Yeah, I like that, because I always say, so I've done numerous genetic tests, and my mom at 52 had cancer. I'm 53 now. And for me, and then I found out that I carry a gene whereby I am predisposed to blood cancers. A lot of people would be like, oh my God, I don't want to know that. You can't do anything about it. But I researched it, and I know some of the nutraceuticals that I can take, and keeping inflammation down, not taking away stress, because you can't take away stress, but just mitigating the effects stress might have on the body is important. So at first there was a fear. I'm like, oh my God, I carry this gene that my mom had, and I'm 52 and she was 52. She's now 77 almost now, by the way. She's good. She's good. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But my point is, yes, it can sometimes be scary, but when you feel like you can do something about it, and you've got physicians like yourself doing such great work to help people, there is help out there, right?
So imagine someone said to you, don't bother checking your blood pressure. Don't bother to check to see if you're getting diabetes. Wait until you've got eye disease, you're going blind. I mean, again, this is such old-fashioned thinking. And we just have to get over that hump that people have told us, yeah, let's live in the past and let's just not check this. Well, the good news is there's a tremendous amount you can do about it. You can prevent this in the vast majority of people. You can treat it successfully, especially early on in the majority of people. So good idea. And it's great for you to know, we all should know our genetics. We all should know our epigenetics. This is now available. The great news is things are available like never before. And as you know, from the wearables, so incredibly helpful. So you can find out, are you dropping your oxygen saturation at night? That's important to know. You can now find out things like your telomere length and your gut microbiome and your oral microbiome and your heart rate variability. These things are all helpful. And are you not getting enough deep sleep or not getting enough REM sleep? So these wearables and this ability now for us to take care of our own health and work with coaches, for example, to help us optimize that, this is going to reduce the global burden of chronic illness. Yes. And that will include Alzheimer's disease. So again, this is a new era.
Okay. So we know to start with mycognoscopy.com. That's where everyone could start.
Yes.
Well, actually, I'm going to say everyone should start by getting your book and, and then go to mycognoscopy.com. But what are some of the things that we can start doing today in terms of two factors? I know we're not going to get into the whole KetoFlex 12, right? Diet or program, but how can we start eating today to optimize our wellness other than whole foods? We should all be eating whole foods. And then number two, what nutraceuticals do you recommend for the majority of people? I know everybody's different, but as a, general rule.
Yeah. So there are 7 basics that we recommend for everybody. And that does start, just as you said, with nutrition. And so, again, as someone who is a classically trained physician and researcher, I was told in medical school that, diet makes very little difference. Calories in, calories out. You can see if you're going to be obese, for example. But the reality is diet has a huge role to play. And unfortunately, all the processed foods that have come down the pike have really harmed us. I suggest that anyone read a wonderful book by Professor Rob Lustig, which is called Metabolical. Fascinating book, and all about why our health has suffered from all these changes in our diet in the last 50 years. So the basics are: get on a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, high in phytonutrients and high in fiber, and have fasting periods at night. So, typically 12 to 16 hours. So if you finish dinner at 7:30, you don't want to start eating before 7:30 in the morning. You want to give your brain and give your body a chance to deal with what you've just given it. And you don't want to eat for 3 hours before bedtime because you spike your insulin. So, that's something that, that hurts you as well. It messes with your sleep. It messes with your inflammation, messes with your liver, all of the above. So for most of us, the problem is our sugar intake is going like this. So we're going highs, bad for us, but we're also going lows. And we hear this all the time. People wake up in the middle of the night. They don't know why it is. And they find out when they do CGM, continuous glucose monitoring. So that just will take about typically 2 weeks, and look to see how your glucose is. They'll find out that they spike it when they eat something like a potato or bread or, some oatmeal or something like that. It spikes up, and then they go to sleep. Now, because their insulin has come out, it now goes too low, and they wake up and their glucose is 45. It shouldn't be high and it shouldn't be low. It should be right in that 70 to 90 range most of the time. So that's a critical piece, and that helps again when you've got a lot of fiber on board, when you've got vegetables on board, and you want both insoluble and soluble fiber. You don't get those spikes, and you get improved lipids, improved cholesterol, improved LDL, improved oxidized LDL, all these sorts of things. So that's the way to begin. And then you mentioned, well, what about supplements?
Yeah.
And again, it depends on what's causing the problem. So again, remember, supplements are supplementary by definition, right?
Yeah.
You're adding to something. And for people who are low in vitamin D, and you may have seen the article that came out just yesterday, low vitamin D associated with greater risk for Alzheimer's disease.
Yes.
So people who supplemented theirs did better. So if you're, whatever is low, that's again why it's important to measure these things. But yes, there are some ones that I really like out of the hundreds that are available. There are some ones that tend to be really helpful. And of course, one of them is to just get enough omega-3s.
Yeah.
We see all the time that people do not have enough omega-3 fats, so they have a pro-inflammatory state, which goes right back to the fact that pro-inflammatory states are what drives the cognitive decline of Alzheimer's disease. Too much saturated fat, not enough omega-3 fats. So omega-3 fats. Resolvins, so-called SPM active or other forms of resolvins, these help to resolve the ongoing inflammation. And this was discovered by Professor Charles Sirhan from Harvard. Some beautiful and elegant work. These resolvins are very interesting. They are essentially fats related to the omega-3 fats, which help resolve ongoing inflammation. And then another good one curcumin, where again, whether you take it as turmeric or as curcumin, it has a nice anti-inflammatory effect. And then interestingly, what I found in myself, and I don't know if your listeners like to use chronometer. This is a CRO. It's not like a chronometer like a watch, but this is the chronometer website. So it's a way to track your intake, to see how you're doing on your fats, to see how you're doing on your total calories, to see how you're doing on your choline. One of the big things that most of us are low in is choline.
Yes.
And you can get that from supplements, things like citicoline or alpha GPC, or you can get it from eating hopefully pastured eggs, things that are high omega-3 eggs, not your typical pro-inflammatory eggs, unfortunately, that are from these, that are factory farmed. And so that's another good one. And so get the nutrients that most of us are deficient in. Number one, magnesium. So most of us will need to take some magnesium to get our magnesium back to normal. Most of us will need to take some zinc. There are 1 billion people on Earth who are deficient in zinc, unfortunately. So zinc is another common one. And then the third one, potassium. Most of us are a bit low in potassium. Fourth one, iodine. Most of us are a bit low in iodine. And the fifth one is choline. So addressing all those, which you can do, of course, with your food, which is great, but you can also get it measured. And if it's too low based on your food, then you can supplement a little bit with that. And then finding out if you've got a leaky gut. And so things like DGL, very good for healing up your gut, because that absolutely, it's something that the doctors didn't used to even believe in leaky gut, but check the work out from Professor Fasano from Harvard, for example, just beautiful work over the years showing how important this is. And that it is absolutely a cause, and a relatively common cause, of systemic inflammation. Mm-hmm. So again, so much that can be done that wasn't available even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I could sit there and talk supplements with you all day long, just because there are many therapeutic supplements out there. And just like what you said, you might carry some genetic predispositions. Like I know I think I have 2 SNPs that predisposition me to low vitamin D. And, I go outside every day. I mean, although look at where I live. I live in Toronto where, right now the weather's not so sunny. However, I try and bring up my stores in the summer, but I do have to supplement. So, I mean, you bring up so many beautiful things, actionable items that people can start doing today.
Yes. And the big change in the medical community, and what's ultimately going to be for all of us, is we're going from an era that is ending in which we thought of things as silos. Oh, you need this. Oh, you got heart disease. Okay, take a drug. You have brain disease. Take this. Now to understanding how the whole thing works together. I mean, that's the whole idea of integrative medicine, of course. But we're starting to see, this is what happens. When you eat wrong, your gut leaks, you create systemic inflammation, you start damaging your brain, you start damaging your blood vessels, you have these various issues. Now, if your magnesium is too low, by the way, you're at increased risk for atrial fibrillation, for example, which 2 million Americans have, including, unfortunately, President Biden has atrial fibrillation. So for all of us, we're beginning to see how this remarkable, complex system, the human body, the human organism, actually works. And so there's so much more that can be done in a much more physiologically appropriate way.
I'm going to say this because I'm a woman going through menopause, and I know a lot of my listeners are. I love that you mentioned hormone optimization as well, because I can't tell you how strongly I believe in this. And unfortunately, the past, there was a lot of fear mongering around not bioidentical, just hormones in general. But but I still get emails. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a licensed physician, but I educate. So people will just ask me, oh, well, doesn't this mean I'm going to get cancer?
Right.
it's still out there. The paradigm
Yeah.
continues.
And Dr. Anne Hathaway has done a wonderful job combing through all this literature. Real expert on this, has done town halls with me and Facebook Lives and things like that, that really have shown, looking at the various studies, that those who are on BHRT do better with their cognition.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do it the right way, actually reduce, not increase, the risk for cancers. But you're right, you've got to do it the right way. You've got to do it with the right molecules. But I think slowly people are coming back. There was this big fear in the early 2000s because of this huge WHI, which just basically said, okay, don't ever do this. And that has unfortunately been a problem. But I think things are slowly coming back as people realize, yes, this actually, under the right circumstances, doing it the right way can be very helpful.
But Dr. Bredesen, I think that fear is still there for Alzheimer's, that there's no hope. And your book and your work is showing that there is.
Absolutely. And this is now an optional disease. So please get on active prevention or earliest treatment. If you have someone in a nursing home who's in late stages, please get all the children checked. I often get these emails about, someone's in a nursing home with a MoCA score of 0. What do you recommend? And my top recommendation is get all the children checked and get them on active prevention. Yes, we might be able to help the person to speak again. And we've seen people with MoCA scores of 0 speak again and start to take care of themselves, but we're still not able to bring them back to a perfect 30. So please get everybody early in there so that you can make sure that you can end the problem with the current generation.
Okay, before we close off, I do want to mention that you actually have a program as well for physicians. Is it called Recode? Recode?
Yeah, so that's from reversal of cognitive decline. So Recode 2.0 training. As I mentioned, we've had over 2,000 people take the training from all over the world and all over the United States. This is available, and not just for physicians, it's also available for caretakers and health coaches and psychologists and so forth and so on. So if you have an interest in cognitive decline, yes, a good idea to learn about this and what you can do about it.
And for anybody who's listening, if you do go on mycognoscopy.com, you do this, the MoCA test, and you're concerned, you can work with a health coach or a physician, because sometimes all of these interventions that include diet and lifestyle and supplements can get overwhelming for people, but there's help there. You've done it all.
Absolutely. So, check your CQ score. Everyone should know this. It's free to check your CQ score, see where you stand, make sure that you're doing okay. And let's make sure that as few people as possible ever get this. So let's reduce the global burden of dementia. We have the ability to do that now.
All right. Dr. Bredesen, tell us where people can find you, your work. Where can we find you?
Yeah, drbredesen.com. And Facebook, Dr. Dale Bredesen, also on Twitter, also on Instagram. So all of those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I loved our conversation, and I love all the work that you're doing.
Thanks very much, Sandy. I should just say that we're now adapting this for other neurodegenerative diseases as well. So we look forward to a future where there's less neurodegenerative disease killing so many of us. So thanks very much for helping to get the word out. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to share it with someone you know might benefit. And always remember, when you rate, review, subscribe, you help to support my content and help me to keep going and bringing these conversations to you each and every week. Join me next week for a new topic, new guest, new exciting conversations to help you live your best life.